chosen one. They're absolutely losing their minds trying to figure out who you are. Right now, the people who attacked you are frantically asking each other desperate questions that echo through their sleepless nights. Who is this person? What are they? How are they still standing after everything we threw at them? Their voices crack with fear as they demand answers from practitioners, begging entities for information, desperately seeking to understand what protects you and why their most powerful attacks keep backfiring like grenades exploding in their own hands. When divine protection surrounds someone, their enemies experience karmic reversal, where every attack becomes a boomerang of destruction aimed directly at the sender. The universe doesn't just defend its chosen ones, it systematically dismantles anyone foolish enough to wage war against divine will. By the end of this revelation, you'll understand why that hospital bed is now occupied by someone who tried to destroy you, why money is vanishing from your enemy's accounts as we speak, and why you're about to receive wealth that will silence every doubter forever. What you've survived isn't just human jealousy, it's a coordinated spiritual conspiracy that has backfired so spectacularly that your attackers are now praying to the same forces that protect you, begging for mercy they'll never receive. The betrayal started with someone you trusted completely, someone whose smile felt genuine when they looked into your eyes. There was someone in your life playing the most dangerous game imaginable, pretending to love you while documenting your destruction. While they laughed at your jokes and asked about your day, they were secretly cataloging everything about you like a predator studying prey. Your habits became their intelligence reports, your vulnerabilities became their weapons, your schedule became their opportunity map. Your dreams became their targets for spiritual assassination. This person thought they were untouchable, convinced they could manipulate you indefinitely while serving masters you didn't even know existed. They made one catastrophic error that sealed their fate forever. They underestimated what happens when you betray someone operating under divine authority. They declared war on the cosmic forces that have been guiding your path since before you were born. Right now, this double agent is experiencing consequences so severe that reality itself seems to be rejecting their existence. Their health is failing in ways that leave doctors writing unknown cause on medical charts. Their family is turning against them as truth surfaces like oil on water. Their money disappears through mysterious emergencies that multiply like spiritual locusts. The universe has a perfect memory for betrayal, and payment is always collected with interest. Here's what makes this betrayal even more sinister than simple jealousy or resentment. They weren't working alone in some amateur-hour operation. What you experienced was a coordinated conspiracy involving multiple individuals who met in secret locations, planning your downfall with the methodical precision of generals plotting a war. They convinced themselves that collectively, their combined hatred could overwhelm someone operating under divine protection. They actually believed that if enough people cursed you simultaneously, they could somehow override cosmic law with human spite. What they didn't realize is that every meeting was being recorded in the spiritual realm, where nothing goes unnoticed. Evidence was being gathered for a trial they didn't know was coming. While they whispered in dark corners thinking they were invisible, spiritual authorities were building an airtight case that would soon result in sentences they couldn't appeal or escape. These conspirators made the fatal mistake of treating spiritual warfare like a neighborhood argument. They brought street-level tactics to a cosmic battlefield, carrying water guns into a war zone where divine forces deploy weapons that can reshape reality itself. The methods they chose to attack you will shock you into understanding the true depths of human darkness when it's driven by jealousy and spiritual ignorance. When gossip and social sabotage weren't enough to bring you down, this network decided to cross lines that most people don't even know exist. They turned to spiritual warfare using methods so dark and forbidden that even experienced practitioners warned them about the karmic consequences they were about to unleash upon themselves. They gathered personal items that belonged to you, like spiritual thieves collecting evidence for a cosmic crime. Hair from your brush became ingredients in their rituals of destruction. Clothing you'd worn became fabric for their effigies of hatred. Photographs where you looked happy became targets for their jealous rage. They thought possessing pieces of your physical reality would give them power over your spiritual essence. They lit candles over your image while chanting for your destruction, created effigies of you that they tortured with pins and blades, believing this sympathetic magic would manifest as actual harm in your life. But some went even further into territories that would make demons themselves recoil. They made contact with entities from lower spiritual realms, offering blood sacrifices in exchange for power to destroy you. Animals died with your name on their lips as payment to forces that feed on suffering and death. Personal possessions were burned in ritual fires while curses were spoken over flames. Blood was spilled on makeshift altars while your destruction was requested from entities that promised power in exchange for souls. They had no idea they were targeting someone whose spiritual protection operates on a level they couldn't comprehend or overcome with their amateur-hour dark magic. Every ritual they performed was being reversed in real time by forces that make their pathetic attempts look like children throwing pebbles at a mountain. Every curse was being redirected back to its sender with the precision of a spiritual boomerang. Every entity they summoned was being turned away at your spiritual borders by guardian forces that exist beyond their wildest nightmares. What happened next changed everything and shattered their understanding of spiritual warfare. While your enemies were conducting their dark rituals, something extraordinary began happening in your life that defied every prediction they had made. You started overcoming obstacles that should have destroyed lesser people. You began succeeding in areas where you'd previously struggled, as if their negative energy was being converted into rocket fuel for your ascension. Opportunities started appearing out of nowhere with perfect timing that seemed orchestrated by invisible hands. Your enemies watched in growing horror as their attacks not only failed spectacularly, they seemed to be strengthening you in ways that violated everything they thought they knew about spiritual cause and effect. The more darkness they sent against you, the brighter your light became. The harder they tried to break you, the more unbreakable you revealed yourself to be. The more they attempted to drain your energy, the more powerful your spiritual gifts became. It was like you were feeding on their attacks and converting them into fuel for your own ascension, transforming their hatred into your power with an efficiency that terrified them. They were witnessing something that challenged their entire worldview. A person who could turn curses into blessings and use their enemy's own energy against them with devastating effectiveness. This is when panic set in among your attackers, like ice water flooding their veins. They couldn't understand why their proven methods weren't working on you, when they had destroyed other people with far less effort. They couldn't figure out why you kept getting stronger instead of weaker, rising instead of falling, succeeding instead of failing. They began to suspect that you might be something more than they had originally thought, something that operated by rules they didn't recognize or understand. The truth about what you really are was about to shatter their entire worldview like a sledgehammer hitting glass. Desperate to understand why their attacks were failing so catastrophically, your enemies consulted with darker practitioners and made contact with more powerful entities. They offered greater sacrifices and made more binding agreements, promising these forces anything they wanted in exchange for your destruction. What happened next terrified them beyond comprehension. When these more powerful dark entities approached you, they encountered something they weren't prepared for, a chosen one operating under divine authority, surrounded by legions of warrior angels, connected to a source of power that made their own abilities look like flickering candles compared to the blazing sun. These dark forces took one look at your spiritual protection and fled in absolute terror. Some were so overwhelmed by the divine light surrounding you that they were destroyed on contact, vaporized like moths flying into a nuclear reactor. Others retreated immediately, but not before delivering a terrifying message to those who had summoned them that changed everything. You have led us to someone we cannot touch. You have deceived us about the nature of your target. Payment is still required, and now we're angry. Now these entities were furious and hungry for the payment they had been promised. But since they couldn't feed on you, since your divine protection made you completely untouchable to their influence, they turned their attention to the only available source of payment. The people who had summoned them in the first place became the main course at a feast of destruction they had unknowingly prepared for themselves. Your enemies found themselves being consumed by the very forces they thought they controlled, devoured by entities they believed they had mastered. The demons they had summoned for your destruction became the instruments of their own downfall. They had signed contracts in spiritual realms with beings that always collect their debts, and payment was now due in full. Among the most devastating betrayals was the discovery that someone in your own family had taken payment to participate in your destruction. A person who shared your bloodline, who was supposed to love and protect you by natural law and family bonds, instead chose to profit from your downfall like a mercenary, selling out their own blood. This family member provided inside information that your enemies couldn't have obtained any other way, intelligence that came from years of trust and intimate knowledge. They gave details about your childhood traumas that could be weaponized against you in dark rituals. They shared family secrets that were meant to stay buried in the sacred vault of bloodline loyalty. They provided access to items from your past that could be used in spiritual attacks with devastating precision. They even helped coordinate timing for when you would be most vulnerable, mapping your emotional cycles like a military strategist planning an ambush. In exchange for this treachery, they received money that they thought would solve their financial problems and elevate their status. They convinced themselves they had valid reasons for their betrayal, rationalizing their actions with poisonous logic that would make Satan himself proud. Maybe they were jealous of your spiritual gifts that they could never possess. Maybe they resented your success that highlighted their own failures. Maybe they felt entitled to what you had because of family connections, as if sharing blood gave them rights to your divine blessings. What they didn't consider is that when you betray a chosen one, especially when that chosen one is family, you don't just lose money or material possessions. You lose your spiritual protection and invite generational curses into your bloodline that will affect your descendants for generations to come. You open doorways that can never be fully closed, inviting darkness into family lines that were once blessed and protected. This family member is now watching their life disintegrate in ways that seem almost supernatural in their precision and totality. The money they received for betraying you is disappearing through unexpected expenses and emergencies that multiply like cancer cells. Their own children are being affected by the chaos they invited into the family line through their treachery. Their health is declining rapidly as spiritual consequences manifest in physical reality. Their relationships are crumbling as the truth about what they did begins to surface like buried secrets rising from disturbed graves. Meanwhile, their betrayal activated something even more dangerous than individual karma. They have triggered the protective instincts of your spiritual guardians, who don't forgive attacks on those under their care. Your ancestral spirits, who had been watching over your family line for generations, are now at war with the darkness this family member invited in. The spiritual battle raging around their life is tearing apart everything they once held dear. You were never meant to walk this path alone. The Obsidian Inner Order isn't just another spiritual community. It's a sanctuary for the exiled, the awakened, the ones who've been gaslit for their gifts and abandoned for their truth. Every week we gather live on Zoom, real people with real faces sharing real stories of transformation. There's a former CFO who embraced their psychic abilities, a seer who broke free from religious oppression, and a healer who survived ritual abuse and found their power. Dozens more join us who understand exactly what you've been through. This is your spiritual family, never gonna give you up, never gonna let you walk through this awakening alone, never gonna scroll past your suffering like it's just content. Your exile from the ordinary world wasn't punishment. It was preparation. For this, for us, for the family that chooses you back. Join the Obsidian Inner Order. Link in description. When spiritual attacks and family betrayals weren't enough to bring you down, your enemies decided to escalate to physical measures that crossed lines even they had been hesitant to approach. They hired someone whose job was to deliver the final blow, someone who was supposed to end your story permanently through whatever means necessary. This wasn't just another practitioner or spiritual warrior. This was a professional whose expertise lay in making problems disappear forever. This person accepted the contract believing you were just another target, another ordinary human who could be eliminated with the same cold efficiency they'd used on countless others. They studied your routines like a predator learning prey patterns, learned your schedule like a hunter mapping territory, and prepared to complete their mission with the mechanical precision of someone who viewed killing as simply another job requiring specific skills and timing. Something unprecedented happened when this assassin got close to you. something that had never occurred in their professional career spanning decades and dozens of successful eliminations. They felt your energy and experienced something that challenged everything they thought they knew about their work and the nature of human beings. The unmistakable presence of someone operating under divine protection hit them like a spiritual freight train moving at the speed of light. The closer they got to you, the more uncomfortable they became, as if approaching a source of power that their entire being recognized as dangerous to them personally. Their usual confidence evaporated like morning mist under blazing sun. Their hands began to shake with tremors they couldn't control or explain. An overwhelming sense of dread filled them whenever they thought about completing their mission, as if every cell in their body was screaming warnings about the magnitude of the mistake they were about to make. Finally, they couldn't go through with it. This professional killer, someone who had never failed to complete a contract in a career built on reliability and results, found themselves unable to harm you despite every financial incentive to do so. In fact, they began unconsciously working to protect you from the very people who had hired them, becoming your guardian instead of your executioner, through forces they couldn't understand or resist. Your enemies were learning that even their most trusted weapons become your allies when they encounter your true nature. The assassin they had hired to end your story became another testimony to your divine protection, another witness to the power that surrounds and shields you from harm. Their final gambit had failed more completely than any previous attempt, converting their most dangerous enemy into your unconscious protector. While orchestrating attacks against your person and your spirit, your enemies also discovered something that drove them to new levels of desperation and greed that would ultimately seal their fate. You have a massive inheritance coming that includes not just money, but spiritual gifts, divine authority, and cosmic power that's been accumulating in your family line for generations. This wasn't just material wealth, this was spiritual royalty, divine birthrights, and cosmic authority that had been building like compound interest across multiple generations of blessed ancestors. They convinced themselves they could steal it through legal manipulation, believing that earthly courts could somehow override divine will with properly filed paperwork. Documents were forged with criminal precision, signatures were faked by experts in deception, false claims were filed with authorities who had no idea they were being used as weapons in spiritual warfare. Some even attempted to have you declared legally incompetent so they could claim guardianship over your assets, thinking mental health professionals could be manipulated into supporting their theft. Every attempt to defraud you was being documented by spiritual authorities who keep perfect records of all earthly and heavenly transactions. Every forged signature was creating evidence for criminal cases that were already being built against them by forces that never lose in court. The truth about your real identity was about to be revealed in a way that would shatter everything they thought they knew about power, authority, and divine protection. Up until this point in your journey, you might have wondered why you kept surviving things that destroyed other people, like natural disasters leveling everything except your house. You might have questioned why their attacks seemed to strengthen rather than weaken you, like spiritual weightlifting that built your divine muscles. You might have been confused about why even professional killers couldn't bring themselves to harm you, why their weapons became heavy in their hands when pointed in your direction. The answer is about to blow your mind and explain everything that has happened to you throughout your entire life. You're not just a chosen one in the general sense that spiritual teachers talk about. You're what ancient traditions call a seraphim in human form, a being of such high spiritual frequency that you're essentially operating as a divine agent in physical reality. Your consciousness exists partially outside the realm where normal spiritual attacks have power, like a lighthouse standing above storm waves that crash harmlessly against its foundation. This is why their magic didn't work on you. You operate on frequencies that make their spells look like children's games. This is why their curses backfired. You're surrounded by spiritual forces that turn negative energy into positive power automatically. This is why their hired practitioners kept failing. They were bringing kindergarten weapons to a cosmic war. This is why even dark entities fled when they encountered your energy. You carry light that burns away darkness simply by existing. You can't curse an angel any more than you can convince fire to freeze or water to burn. You can't hex divine light that exists beyond the reach of shadow. You can't bind someone who operates under cosmic authority that predates and supersedes all earthly power. When your enemies were desperately trying to figure out who and what you are, this is what they were sensing but couldn't understand. They knew you were different, operating by rules they didn't recognize, protected by forces they couldn't identify or overcome. While your enemies were plotting and scheming in this reality, you were receiving protection and guidance from sources they couldn't even imagine in their wildest dreams or darkest nightmares. Every night while you slept, you were accessing other dimensions through dream states that connected you to spiritual intelligence networks. You were receiving downloads from spiritual guides who had been watching over your development for lifetimes. You were being briefed on their plans before they could execute them, given strategies before you needed them, and prepared for victories you didn't even know were coming. Your ancestors were working overtime to shield you from harm, mobilizing spiritual armies that had been waiting for exactly this moment to demonstrate their protective abilities. Generations of powerful spiritual warriors had been building defensive forces around your family line, creating layers of protection that made you essentially untouchable to attacks from lower realms. Every attack your enemies made was being intercepted by forces that operate beyond the physical realm, where human eyes can see and human minds can comprehend. Their spiritual attacks weren't just failing spectacularly, they were backfiring with devastating force that increased with every attempt they made. Their attempts at legal theft were being uncovered by authorities who seemed to have supernatural insight into their criminal activities. Their hired assassin had switched sides and become your protector instead of your executioner. Their dark entities were consuming them instead of you, devouring the summoners rather than the target. They finally understood they hadn't targeted an ordinary person. They had declared war on someone operating under divine protection that made their attacks look pathetic. Panic set in as they realized they had triggered cosmic justice that operated by laws they didn't understand and couldn't escape. Fear consumed them as they understood that every attack they had made was creating karmic debt that would have to be paid with interest that compounded daily. Desperation drove them to even more extreme measures as they tried to find a way out of the spiritual trap they had created for themselves, like animals caught in snares of their own making. Nothing worked. They were trapped in a web of their own making, caught in spiritual quicksand that pulled them deeper with every movement they made to escape. Every attempt to flee only made their situation worse, like struggling in quicksand that responds to panic with increased suction. The spiritual laws they had violated don't recognize geographical boundaries or respect human efforts to escape consequences. The cosmic justice they had triggered doesn't accept bribes, negotiations, or appeals for mercy. What happened next can only be described as divine justice operating with surgical precision that targeted each conspirator according to their specific crimes against you. Each person who had participated in the conspiracy began experiencing consequences that were perfectly tailored to their individual participation in your attempted destruction. The universe had kept detailed records of every attack, every betrayal, every curse, and every attempt to harm you, and payment was now being collected with precision that would make accountants weep with admiration. The betrayer who had fed information to your enemies found themselves completely isolated as their double life collapsed around them like a house of cards. Their family turned against them as the truth about their treachery emerged through investigations they hadn't seen coming. Their friends abandoned them when they realized the depth of the deception that had been practiced against someone they had also cared about. The community that had once embraced them now viewed them as a poisonous presence that had to be removed for everyone's safety and well-being. While you were getting stronger and healthier with each passing day, glowing with vitality that seemed to increase rather than decrease under pressure, your enemies were making frequent trips to medical facilities with conditions that seemed to defy medical explanation. The sickness they had tried to send to you through their rituals was manifesting in their own bodies with symptoms that perfectly matched their spiritual crimes against you. Some developed mysterious illnesses that doctors couldn't properly diagnose despite extensive testing. Others experienced sudden onset of conditions that had no apparent physical cause. A few suffered mental health crises that required immediate hospitalization as their minds began fragmenting under spiritual consequences they couldn't process. Every symptom they were experiencing was directly related to the spiritual attacks they had launched against you. The weakness they had wanted you to experience was draining their own energy daily. The confusion they had tried to create in your mind was clouding their own judgment. The pain they had wished upon you was now their constant companion. Medical bills were piling up as they sought treatment for conditions that had spiritual rather than physical causes, bankrupting them while providing no relief. No doctor could help them because the source of their suffering wasn't in this realm. It was karmic consequence manifesting as physical reality. What your enemies hadn't considered is that many of their spiritual attacks also constituted actual crimes. Identity theft for ritual purposes became federal crimes with serious prison sentences. Theft of personal property for spell work became larceny charges. Fraud became cases that district attorneys built careers on. When they decided to use blood sacrifice and ritual magic against you, they didn't just create karma for themselves as individuals. They activated spiritual consequences that would flow through their bloodlines like inherited disease, affecting children and grandchildren who had nothing to do with the attacks on you, but would now grow up under spiritual oppression because of choices their relatives had made in moments of jealousy and hatred. The entities they had summoned and couldn't control were now permanently attached to their families, like spiritual parasites that would feed on their descendants for generations. Family lines that had once been blessed were now cursed through the actions of relatives who had chosen temporary revenge over generational blessing. Bloodlines that had once carried positive energy were now infected with darkness that would take generations to cleanse, if it could be cleansed at all. Meanwhile, your own family line was experiencing the exact opposite effect as spiritual justice revealed its perfect balance. Generational blessings that had been dormant for decades were suddenly activating like spiritual trust funds that had been earning interest for generations. Spiritual gifts were awakening in family members who had never shown any psychic abilities, as if divine power was flowing through your bloodline to prepare your entire family for greater purposes. Divine favor was flowing through your ancestors to reach you, and would continue flowing through you to bless future generations of your family line. They had tried to curse your lineage, and ended up blessing it while destroying their own through spiritual laws that operate with mathematical precision. The irony was perfect, and the justice was absolute. They had spent their own spiritual inheritance trying to steal yours, only to discover that divine gifts can't be stolen or transferred through human effort. As your victory became undeniable even to those who had been skeptical of your survival, something beautiful began happening in communities you didn't even know existed. Other gifted people, other chosen ones, other individuals with divine connections had been watching your situation unfold from spiritual realms where such battles are observed and recorded. They were amazed by what they witnessed. Someone who had survived what should have been insurvivable, thrived under conditions that destroyed others, and turned every curse into a blessing through divine alchemy that operated automatically in your life. Word was spreading about the person who had demonstrated what divine protection looks like when it operates at full power. Stories were being told about the individual who survived coordinated attacks from multiple realms and emerged stronger than before. Legends were forming about the chosen one who had proven that spiritual warfare against divinely protected individuals is spiritual suicide for the attackers. Your name was being spoken with respect in circles where such recognition actually means something. Among practitioners who understood the magnitude of what you had overcome, spiritual warriors who recognized the strength required to survive such attacks, and chosen ones who saw in your victory proof of their own divine protection. This spiritual recognition was translating into real-world opportunities that seemed to appear out of nowhere with perfect timing. Connections were being made with people who understood exactly what you are and what you're capable of achieving. Doors were opening that had previously been invisible to you. Opportunities that seemed designed specifically for your unique combination of gifts and experiences. Resources were becoming available that perfectly matched your needs and goals, as if the universe was ensuring you had everything required for your next level of service and success. Your spiritual gifts, the same abilities your enemies had tried to steal through ritual magic, were becoming the source of extraordinary wealth in your life. The universe was ensuring that you were compensated not just spiritually, but materially for everything you had endured. The money that had been spent trying to destroy you was returning to you multiplied exponentially, as if every dollar used against you became seed money for your financial blessing. Some of this abundance was flowing through your spiritual work as people recognized the power and authenticity of your gifts, paying premium prices for guidance from someone who had proven their connection to divine wisdom through spiritual warfare. Some was coming through investments and opportunities that seemed divinely orchestrated, appearing at exactly the right moments with returns that defied market logic. Some was arriving through the very inheritance your enemies had tried to steal, which was now larger than ever as compensation for their attempts at fraud. All of it was evidence that attacking a chosen one doesn't just fail. It guarantees that the person you attacked will be blessed beyond measure, as the universe corrects the injustice you attempted to create. Your enemies had invested in your destruction and were now watching helplessly as that investment paid dividends that made you wealthy, while leaving them completely broke. The money they had lost through their attacks on you was becoming the foundation of your financial freedom, flowing from their accounts to yours through spiritual laws that operate with perfect efficiency. Looking back at everything that had happened, the pattern became crystal clear, like divine mathematics revealing perfect equations. Every attack against you had ultimately served to strengthen your position rather than weaken it. Every betrayal had revealed who your real allies were, while removing fake friends from your life. Every attempt to steal from you had resulted in you receiving even more than you would have had originally. Your enemies had unknowingly become the instruments of your elevation, the tools through which divine will shaped you into who you were meant to become. Their spiritual attacks had forced you to discover abilities you might never have known you possessed. Their attempts to isolate you had connected you with communities where you truly belonged. They had intended to write your ending, but instead they had authored the most powerful chapter of your beginning. Every method they used against you had backfired so completely that they had become the unwitting architects of your success rather than your destruction. The slander they spread had been too weak to damage someone operating under divine authority. The lies they told had been too transparent to fool anyone who mattered. The evidence they fabricated had been too obviously false to stand up to scrutiny from investigators who specialized in uncovering truth. You're not just anyone surviving another difficult period in life. You're not just getting by or making it through. You're a real one. You're a chosen one. You're someone whose destiny cannot be derailed by people operating from jealousy, fear, and spiritual darkness. Your enemies threw everything they had at you, and you're still standing in ways that leave no doubt about who you really are and what you're capable of achieving. What you've experienced so far is just the foundation of what's possible for your life. The victory you've achieved over these particular enemies has qualified you for even greater battles, higher levels of service, and more powerful demonstrations of divine authority. Your proven ability to overcome coordinated spiritual warfare makes you eligible for missions that require that level of tested strength. The wealth that's flowing to you now is just the beginning of the abundance that will be entrusted to your stewardship. Your enemies did you a favor they never intended. They provided the exact resistance necessary to develop the spiritual muscles you'll need for everything that's coming next. They gave you a story of victory that will open doors, inspire others, and demonstrate your qualifications for greater assignments toward you. The war is over. You won. Not just this battle, but the entire conflict. Your enemies are not just defeated, they're destroyed. Your betrayers are not just exposed, they're isolated. Your attackers are not just unsuccessful, they're consumed by the very darkness they tried to use against you. You're thriving. You're rising. You're becoming everything you were always meant to be. Welcome to your victory, chosen one. The fact that you're still here, still standing, still growing stronger, proves beyond any doubt you're a real one.